I wish I had time tonight to share everything I know about Rich. But he has a son here tonight, and he doesn't know everything about his dad, so I'll hold off on that. Actually, he understood Bill to say, bring those large turkeys. Y'all heard that? So this was the biggest turkey he could find to get here. So I drove out here from Raleigh, North Carolina area. And I'm glad to be here. Good to see y'all here. Good to have the senior adult group here. You guys doing all right over there? So I'm assuming this is the youth ministry, right? Okay. Well, great to have you guys. If you will, open your Bibles. The old black preacher said, just open them up and I'll get there eventually. I'm delighted to share a story of encouragement to you. I think every one of us at some time or the other get a little discouraged about life. Amen? You guys ever get discouraged about life? I can't imagine what it's like being a teenager right now, but I know what it was like when I was growing up, and it sure has to be a lot more difficult. I got 2 teenage grandsons, and I tell you what, I pray for them quite often. But getting old isn't all it's cut out to be either, is it? My dad is 92 years old, living with my sister in East Houston, and he's always encouraging me. Every time I go and visit him, I get up and I grunt, and he said, well, don't worry, son, it'll get worse. So we all enjoy a little encouragement, don't we? My life verse has been Philippians 4:13. You guys memorized that one yet? What does it say? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do all things through Jesus who gives me my strength. You believe that? Why do you believe it? Have you put it to practice? Yeah, you have? Something that you've done? Trust me, there's going to be a whole lot more you're going to need that verse to hang on to. Life is full of all kinds of ups and downs and ins and outs, right? It is. And Philippians 4:13 has been very special to me. And to be honest, it's the older I get, the more precious it is. I believe it because of a young man I met many years ago. His name is Harold. Harold was a normal kid growing up in Arkansas. He was a pretty active little boy. His mom said that he could entertain himself all day long with a stick and a rock. It'd either make that rock a hand grenade or a baseball or a football to throw a pass, or that stick could become a bow and arrow where he's shooting the cavalry, or it'd become a rifle and he's shooting the Indians. But he had such an imagination. And in fact, guys, believe it or not, they didn't have Game Boys and all of that stuff back then. So you had to come up with something creative, and that's what Harold came up with. He was a very active boy. One morning he woke up with a fever, and his mom wouldn't let him go to school. He had started the first grade. And he was probably about 6 weeks into his first grade year. And mom kept him home. And typical kids, you know, even though they got a fever, you know what, they can still play Indians and cowboys with the best of them. And he was running around the house, jumping over the couch and the chair, and attacking a pillow or two here or there. And eventually, about mid-morning, he got to falling down, and he'd just laugh and get up, and he'd tell his mom, and said, I can't feel my feet. And long about noon, he was down more than he was up, and he'd laugh and say, I can't feel my legs. And his mom became concerned and called the doctor, and the doctor came out to the house and actually examined him, called for an ambulance, and they rushed him to Little Rock to St. Vincent's, and they called in the 3 top neurologists of the state. And they did 3 spinal taps during the evening and came out right before midnight that night and told his mom and dad he wouldn't live through the night. He was completely paralyzed. But he did. The next morning, he couldn't move his head. He couldn't close his eyes. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't talk, communicate, couldn't do anything. They put a tube down his throat into his lungs to pump oxygen in there. And they put a tube down his throat into his stomach to put liquid feed in there so he had nutrition. And they never expected the kid to live. They never put him in an iron lung because, you see, he contacted a disease called polio. And he did it from the most unusual way, probably 8 to 10 million to 1 chances. But before he entered the first grade, he went to the high school gym in Malvern, Arkansas, and stood in a long line and eventually got up to the front, and there was a doctor and a nurse, and they were dispensing a little sugar cube. And what little 6-year-old kid doesn't want sugar, right? And inside that sugar cube was 1 drop of a vaccine, a live vaccine, that was supposed to keep a person from getting this disease that was running across America called polio. Well, he got polio from the vaccine. And that's the reason it attacked his central nervous system so quickly. And they had no clue what was going on. Days became weeks in St. Vincent's. Every day the doctor would come in and prick his legs, start at his toes with needles and prick it and go all the way up his body to his head. And there would be hundreds of little blood spots, but no feeling, absolutely nothing. After about 3.5 months, one day he closed his eyes, which was new because the only relief he got from the light, because his eyes would never close, his mom would put her hand over his eyes and let them rest from the lights in the hospital room. Eventually, in a couple of more weeks, he got to where he could move his head and he could swallow. And he was making progress, and because he could swallow, they put the tubes out. He was breathing without any problem now. So they would put a liquid down his throat that he could swallow for nutrition. He was breathing on his own. Everything was good. They're still pricking him every day. Nothing in his hands or his arms or his legs. And eventually, his dad made the decision to take Harold home. And so they carried him home. In the next few years of his life, his means of travel was he would travel in the arms of his mom and dad. So everywhere they went, he traveled in their arms. So if they went to church, they just set him on the back pew, actually probably about where that gentleman is back there, and they put a pillow there, and he'd lay there and be able to look down the aisle and hear the preacher what he's got to say, or whether he was concerned about it or not, he listened, okay? And if they went to visit family, they'd put him in the floor, and the friends or cousins would come and gather around him, and that's the way they communicated with him. Well, one day, he was laying in his bed, and he got use of his left arm. And it was a couple of weeks later, and he got use of his right arm. And the next thing you know, he just got to figuring out how he could raise his arms up. He wasn't, real good with it, but at least he was moving them, and they'd flop wherever they wanted to. And he got to flopping his arms around one day, and the next thing you know, he flopped, and he went plumb off of the bed on the floor on his face. And what do you do? What do you do if you're laying there on the floor on your face? What do you do? Call for help, right? No. That's not what Harold did. He figured out he could just put this arm out and try to drag himself. And he couldn't, but he tried it with this arm. And with both of them, he got to moving. And oh my goodness, that's progress, right? And it wasn't long after a few weeks, he got to where he could drag himself. And he'd drag himself everywhere, all over the house. He'd drag himself out the back door, across the gravel, out in the lawn. He got so proficient at dragging, he could drag himself all over the yard. Every once in a while, his chin would drop, and he'd get a mouthful of grass and dirt, and he'd just spit it out and keep on going. He was good at crawling. In fact, after a few months, he had big old, his mom called them camel knees right here on his arms, calluses from crawling so much and using that. Well, after a while, he got to where he was so strong enough in his arm. Next thing you know, he's trying to figure out how he could sit on his bottom. And eventually, he figured it out. Now, his legs He didn't have any control over them, but what do? Just sit on your bottom, right? No, what do? Push yourself. Next thing you know, he was moving again. This time it was on his bottom, right? It wasn't long, he became a professional butt scooter. Can you say butt in here? I did. Anyway, he was a professional boot scooter. How's that? I mean, he would go crazy. I mean, he could just fly, but he couldn't control his legs. And guess what? When he would go from one room to the other, once in a while, that doorway would get caught with his toes, and he'd crash and burn. And the next thing you know, he was back up going at it again. For the next 3 years of his life, he tried so hard to do something that the doctor said that he would never do when he left the hospital. That boy will never walk again. But he kept trying. And eventually one day he figured out how his legs wouldn't straighten out, but how he could lean back like this against the wall, and he could hold himself up. And what do? You just stay against the wall, right? Well, no, you move. You just drag his booty over, drag this leg and then this leg, drag his booty over, and drag this leg and this leg. And he did great till he got to the corner, but he couldn't figure out how to negotiate the corner. So what do? You just scoot it all the way back to the other way. And his biggest challenge, see, is progress, right? You don't want to stay somewhere for very long. You know what happens if you get stuck and you stay somewhere for very long? Huh? You become a relic. That's what happens. You become a relic. You're petrified. Is that what they're called? Petrified. You just become hard and gristle. No, don't stay. Don't stay where you are. Keep making progress, right? Doesn't matter how old you are. You may be 6 years old. You may be 100 and, where is Ed? 102. Whatever it is, you keep going. But his biggest challenge was wanting to walk. He had 2 twin beds about this distance in his bedroom. And even though he fell thousands of times, one day he figured out how he could drag his legs and get to that bed. And he went back the other way. And he kept doing that. That was his practicing. And you know, all that time, his mom and dad had absolutely no clue what that boy was up to. Not a clue. And one day, he made the decision to push away from his bed and walk out of the bedroom, down the hallway, into the living room. His mom was in there. Now, let me tell you something about Harold's mom. She was just a good old Baptist girl, right? Okay? Now, I don't know if you know about religions, but Baptists are pretty prim and proper. You know, they sit in church, open their hymnals. You know, they don't, kind of like Methodists, they just kind of, just sit there. Well, that old Baptist girl, when that boy walked into that living room, became a Pentecost. You know what a Pentecost does? Woo! She was jumping up and dancing like she had never danced before. Her little boy walked. And he did. But I want to tell you something. That little boy is 16 years old now. It's time to go back to school. He's not in the first grade no more. But I want to tell you something about that little boy's first grade teacher. Any teachers in here? His first grade teacher, Mrs. Heinley, devoted 2 or 3 evenings a week to spend 2 hours after she taught all day long to keep him in his schoolwork. You know how much she charged? Nothing. Not a dime. She did it because she loved the Lord and she loved the little boy. That's why she did it. So he goes to school, high school, 16 years old. Now there's a problem. He didn't walk normal. He just kind of drug his legs, and he wasn't very stable. He couldn't carry his books. Other kids had to carry the books. One book would throw him off balance and he'd fall. But there was another problem. He didn't have control over his bodily functions because he was paralyzed for so long. He would wet his pants every day. Now, can you imagine a 16-year-old walking down the hallway of a high school and he peed in his pants? Huh? Can you imagine? And it's not like he can change. They just had to dry till he wet them again. But you know what I learned? In every school that I go into, even in church youth groups, there's always somebody, and they're called bullies. Bullies. You know who I'm talking about? Well, you're probably thinking of one right now. You might be sitting by one. I hope you're not. But the bullies, I call them the devil's sidekicks. Because every time that little cripple boy would walk down the hall with wet pants, the bullies would make sure everybody in the hallway knew. And they didn't even call him Harold. You know what they called him? The cripple boy. Oh, look, the cripple boy, he done peed in his pants again. And you think that's bad? Imagine when he did number. His mom had to come to school and help him go to the boys' locker room and shower and clean up and put a new set of clothes on. Imagine what that must have been like. Every day they would knock him down just so they could get a laugh. Those became the most difficult years of his life. Let me tell you what it was like as a senior, because he wanted to go on a date. But what kind of girl, I got to ask y'all this. What kind of girl is going to go out on a date with a guy that's going to wet his pants? Would you? Huh? And it was going to happen. If it lasted very long, it was going to happen. They didn't have the pins back there. You know, that's diapers for grown folk. They didn't have those back then. But I'm going to tell you something. If it wasn't for 3 or 4 really sweet girls in his youth group that loved him just the way he was, he would have never been out on a date. But they went on a date. And even though he wet his pants, it was okay. They would skate. They would stay at the movie. They would do whatever. And if he did number 2, guess what? The date's over. That's it. Go home. But they cared. He always worried about getting married. You thinking dating was hard? Imagine finding somebody that would go to bed with you and you're wetting the bed every night. You would wake up beside him soaking wet. And when he would get ready and go to work, you were left to take the sheets and wash them, put them back on the bed, make sure they're clean. One day at a youth camp, y'all getting the hint here? Underneath a little oak tree at a picnic table, his cousin introduced him to an angel. And her name was LaDonna. And she spent all those years sleeping with him and waking up wet every day because she loved him. She cared about him. See, the reason I know that's so true is because that's me, Harold Buddy Ritter. And that's my story. I wish I could be proud of my whole story, but I'm not. Because you see, I'm human, so high school made me very bitter and angry inside. Most people didn't see it, but my family knew it. And I carried that as a pastor for years inside of me, and it made me angry and mad. I didn't like the way they treated me. I wanted to just be normal. I wanted to walk normal, even as a young adult married, and even as a father of 2 sons. When I would walk by a window, I would look at the reflection, and I just didn't walk normal. I still don't walk normal. I got a big butt. My mom always, I used that word again, Bill, I'm sorry. But my mom always said I was supposed to have been a girl. That's the reason it's so big. Yeah, that's what she told me. Anyway, I had a hard time. Richard's back there laughing. Why'd I ask that guy to come? Bill said it, I'm a mess, right, Bill? But you know what God does? He takes his messes and makes them into something special. And he did. At the age of 32, I decided to do something I hadn't done since I was 6 years old. I decided to go out and try to jog one day, but I was a typical Baptist preacher, overweight, out of shape, and I made it 1 block jogging. And I huffed and puffed for a block or two, and I jogged another block, and eventually I got to where I could run a mile. And see, it goes back to falling out of the bed on my face, and what do? You got to move. So if I just kept moving. And over a period of months, I got to where I could run a whole mile without stopping. In a couple of years, I entered a 5K race, and I ran with several hundred runners, and I finished toward the back, but I beat a bunch of old men and women. And I was so proud of myself that I did 3.1 miles. And eventually I did a 10K, 6.2 mile race, and I finished in the back third. I beat a bunch of old men and women and even some middle-aged ones. But I kept on doing it until eventually I said, well, hey, I want to try a marathon, a 26.2 mile race. And the only one I knew about was in Fayetteville. It was the Hogeye Marathon, right? In the mountains, and at the time was the 4th toughest marathon in America. I go up there with my wife and my sons, and I start off and run out of town, cross the mountains, and we come back in, and I finish in the 50-yard line of Razorback Stadium, and I go over to the side and just fall on my back, and my wife and kids are there like, way to go, Dad. You finished. I said, yeah, I did. Finished in the top 10%. Ken Hatfield was a football coach, and he come over. I'll never forget. He looked at me. He said, boy, you okay? I said, yes, sir, I'm fine. I did it. Well, I kept running marathons. I went to Dallas to actually Fort Worth, the Cowtown Marathon on Saturday. And I ran it with some friends and did really well. 3:08 was my time. And 3:06 was my time, which is a really good 3-hour marathon. That was pretty good. And on our way back that night to Arkansas, we come up with this crazy idea. I'd taken Sunday off, so I didn't worry about having to preach. We decided to do the Arkansas Marathon in Booneville. So we just took a nap in the car and got up and registered, and I ran it 18 minutes faster than I did the day before. And they're like, wow, you need to get into ultra running. I said, what's that? And they said, that's 50 and 100 mile races. And I said, are you crazy? So I said, well, it's a challenge. I didn't know how to train, didn't know nothing about it. I'd just go out and run every day. And when I got back, I was back. And I took my wife and my sons, and the race is at the end of Love Field, the airport there. It's called Baltman Lake. It's a little over 3 miles around a paved trail around this lake. And I'm geared up with 350 runners from all over the world. And I get out and I take off. And every time I would come around, the boys would offer me a little piece of a Snicker or a piece of a banana or D-Fizz Coke. And I did D-Fizz Coke. You know why? If you drink regular Coke and you're running, guess what? It comes up. So D-Fizz Coke. And I'm doing really well, running with some of the best. And I'm running, and now, my paralysis for so long, I never regained pain sensation. I could tell you some really crazy stories, but I just don't feel pain. But my legs jerk and let me know something's wrong. I didn't know what was wrong, so I'm at mile 34 when I come around, and I sit down in the chair, and the boys start checking my legs, and they take my shoes and socks off, and they said, wow, Dad, your feet's swollen. Nobody told me your feet swell up when you run that far. But I didn't go there to quit, right? So I just jumped up and ran the last 16 miles barefooted on that pavement. And when I crossed the finish line, I finished first. And they called for us to go up on the stage. And you know what I did? I said, not right now. And I took my wife and my sons, and we walked away from the crowd down beside that little lake. And I prayed. And I asked God to forgive me. because I blamed God for letting me have paralysis, polio. When I got back home, I asked my mom and dad to forgive me because I blamed them for making me take that sugar cube. But I asked my wife and sons there beside that lake to forgive me for being angry for so long. At the age of 49, I was blessed to run the fastest 100-miler in the United States, 15 hours and 2 minutes. Any of y'all run at all? Any of you guys run? Any runners in the bunch? Yeah. You ever run a mile? No? Any of you adults ever run? Corey, you ever run? Huh? A little bit? What's your fastest mile? 6.5. Oh, that's fast. Well, I ran a 9-minute mile 100 times. If you can imagine, a 9-minute mile 100 times around a track, and a lot of it was barefooted. And at the age of 49, I ran the fastest 100 miles in the United States. At the age of 56, 9 years ago, a thing called post-polio hit me, and I lost the use of my legs. I had to have major surgery in a wheelchair. And the Lord blessed me. I got up and got out of the wheelchair, and I was pretty good in the wheelchair too. But anyway, I got up and walked again. And I had major surgery 4 years ago, and I was back in a wheelchair, but the Lord blessed me and put me back on my feet. And, you know, I've determined that I'm just going to keep going till Jesus comes. But I was blessed from the age of 32 to the age of 56 to run 78,000 miles. That's about 2.5 times around the earth. And that's not bad for a little crippled boy from Malvern, Arkansas. But I want to tell you, it's that scripture that I want you to remember. I can do all things through Jesus Christ who gives me strength. I became a believer in Jesus on that back pew when I understood my sinfulness and my need to accept him. And I called on him. And I asked God to forgive me, and I believe that Jesus and what he did on the cross was sufficient enough to save me. And I got saved. And I became a part of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, where Ritter would later pastor. I was a pastor for almost 10 years, and I got saved again. And you got to understand what I'm saying. Not saved with salvation. I just got saved from a lot of ugliness in my life. But the Lord delivered me from a lot of bad attitudes and a lot of just junk in my life. And God changed me, didn't he, Rich? He did. He changed my ministry. And I'm so thankful that he did. I still pastor the church. I took a little country church thinking that I could handle 30 people, and now it's over 100. And God's blessing us. Actually, Rich has done our revival the last 3 years. But I got to tell you, something new happened starting last month. There's a school in Texas, a public school, that went through 3 suicides in a month. And the president of the school board knew my story from speaking at East Texas Baptist University every summer. And he says, he asked the school board for permission to bring me in as a preacher with my Bible and offer hope to that school district. So I went last month, and it's the best revival I've ever been in at a school. I spoke 6 times to the elementary, 7 times to the middle school, and 8 times to the high school. I was privileged to lead the superintendent of schools to Jesus, some of the high school students and middle school students, and a couple of families. And the revival's still going on because of hope. We're all hopeless people outside of Jesus. Do you understand that? Guys, when you reach the end and you don't feel like that you can go any further, that's where you'll find Jesus. And he'll take you at your worst. He will. And if you'll let him, he will make something very good out of your life. I'm living proof. I'm 65 years old. I should be thinking about retirement, and now God's opened up a whole new adventure for me. Y'all pray for me. I'm going to be at Lake Hamilton Schools Friday, on to Ouachita Schools on Tuesday. But it's schools now. Isn't that crazy? That God would choose to open doors to schools to an old geezer like me. Bill said I had to hush by 8. Bill's already left. He done went to sleep, didn't he? Well, we got plenty of time. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you a chance to ask me some questions, okay? And I've had every kind of question asked that you can imagine, so you're not going to embarrass me. I'll answer a few of them. Do I still wet in my pants? No! Do I still wet in the bed? No! Thank goodness I found a doctor in Hot Springs that figured that out. I'm happy. Do I have 2 sons? Yes, I still have 2 sons. Great kids. Great young men. Kind of like that boy right back there. But God's using them in unique ways. 5 grandsons. Don't have a granddaughter yet, but I'll take one back to North Carolina if anybody wants to ride back with me. My wife is just turned 63 week before last. No, wait a minute. Last month. And she just graduated. What's the big one, Nancy? Magna cum laude? Oh, my Lottie, I called it. But she just graduated from grad school with her master's in teaching, and I'm proud of her. She made 1 B in 6 years of college, and that's not bad for a little country girl that I married at 17. But I'm very proud. She's a school teacher. She teaches 3- and 4-year-old exceptional children, pre-K, public school, and she loves it. Question. You kids have a question? I'm going to start with the seniors and move down, okay? Y'all have a question? Ask me a question. Yes, sir.
When did you stop wetting your pants?
When did I stop wetting my pants? Probably, let's see, let me think. Probably about 97, 98. Not my age, the year. So about 20 years ago. I'm not as old as Ed, okay? I'm 65. I'm still young. Do what? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It just happened, baby. And you know what? You know what's so cool about most 100-mile races that I've run? They're in the mountains. So it didn't matter. Eventually, you'd get to a river, and they'd have a cable across it, and you'd go across, that cleaned you up, so you're good to go again. I've never got to talk about this in a church setting. But y'all know this ain't the church, right? You be the church. Y'all understand that. This is a building that's dedicated to worship the Lord. So it's okay. You can let your hair down. I've let mine down. That's why it's so thin. Somebody else. Another question. Yes, sir.
Can you share a little bit about when you started ministry?
Ministry? I can. When God began to speak to my heart at 18 years old, grew up in church, so church was my life. Never forget, there was an old pastor named George Raley. You remember Brother George? George Raley. Such a sweet man, but he heard me every time we'd have revivals, they'd get the young guys to do a devotional every night. So when I did my devotional, he leaned over to my pastor and he said, that boy will be a preacher one of these days. Didn't know he was a prophet, but it was. But God stirred my heart, and I ran from it for about a year. And my salvation spirits was very normal. It was my heart that became convicted. In my mind, I understood it, and I surrendered and said yes to the Lord and received Jesus into my life. But my surrender to ministry was totally different. I'm going to tell you, I went to Bog Springs camp, and David, he was the registrar for years at the seminary. What's his name? David Ward. He was a college kind of minister then. And he took me aside, and we tried to talk through those things. And one night it became so convicted that I had a relapse to my polio almost. I got up to walk down the side of that tabernacle, and I made about 5 steps, and I fell to the ground. And all I could do was cry. And he happened to be they used to line all the preachers up there. He saw me and came to me. And we spent 3 or 4 hours that night. But it was a serious thing to me. I saw how my church sometimes treated preachers, and I sure didn't want to go through that. But to know that it was God's call, what do you do? If you say no to God, your life's going to be miserable for the rest of it. You know that? So you say yes, and I said yes. And he was very good to me. I wished I could tell you the places that I've been, how God's used me, and I'm astounded. I got a card. She's not here. Did you give me the card? No, it wasn't you that gave me the card. You'd know it if you gave me the card, right? You didn't give me this, did you? Okay. Guy looked similar to you. But anyway, she's in your church, and she said, I attended a Bible camp in the mid-90s and heard you speak. And I told people about you being an ultra runner and having polio. And of all the summers I attended camp, I can honestly say you're the only speaker I still remember 20 plus years later. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. That's why we do what we do for Jesus. It's not a waste of time. You can buy homes, and you can accumulate property, and you can have all kind of things, but they're not going to last. But I'm going to tell you something. What you do for Jesus, it's eternal. It is. I got to keep it because it's special. I can't wait to see her next Wednesday night. She's supposed to be here when I speak to the Awana Club. But guys, that's why you do it. Are you on staff here? You just look like Richard told me all about you now. You just kind of fit that profile. That's why you do it. For years, I've poured my life into students. 28 years at Awana camp as a camp speaker. Thousands and thousands of kids. I've got Timothys in the ministry all over the world right now. That's why I do it. It's not about me. It's not about you. You understand that? It doesn't matter. Who's the oldest person here? He's got to be. Yeah, it's got to be at 102. Who's older than Ed? Be honest and raise your hand. Come on, ladies. I was told never to ask a woman how old she is and never ask her weight. So I'm not going to ask you how much you weigh, but I'm going to ask you who's older than 82? Yeah? You're not too old. You know, my dad's 92 years old. You know what he volunteers at the church to do? He's 92. He's been disabled since he was 48. He vacuums the church. Not for money. Rich, was he mowing the yard when you was pastoring there? Man, he mowed I don't know how many acres for, 20, 30 years for nothing. He was a real deacon. He did it for nothing, just because he loved the Lord and loved his pastors and just who he was. That's why you do it. You do it for the Lord. And when you do that, guess what? It adds up. You guys don't understand. How old are you? 15? 15? 16? That's your boyfriend? No, okay. I'm going to say, you're dating an older woman, boy. No. So, let me tell you something. You look at your life at 15, 14, 16, and you think, oh, wow, your life is ahead of you. Every day is God's opportunity for you to make a difference in somebody's life. And what you do for the Lord matters. You may not see it now. You may not even know it now. And see, I wasted so much of my life because, you know why? I was bitter and mad and angry with God and everybody else. But when God broke me and God forgave me and I found forgiveness with myself and everybody else, then God said, okay, now I'll take you and I'll work on you for a while. And that's what he does. Somebody else. Any of you kids have a question? Surely you got a question. Oh, got some over here. All right. Yes, sir.
Have you ever been majorly injured and not know?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that question. I broke the big bone in this fibula.
Femur at the top.
No, down here. So it was my running. It was so strong that it spiraled and it separated. When I picked my leg up, my foot was dangling like this upside down. Instead of like this, it was dangling, and the bone stuck out there. So I wore a cast for 3.5 months and then a boot for a month and a half. And the day I got my boot off, you know what I did? I ran 5 miles, barefooted. And I broke this one, both bones in this leg. Actually, and I was going to speak at NBSF in Arkadelphia. I ran 10 miles back home. I fell, tripped, running down a mountain. And I just thought I sprained it, so I just tightened my shoe up, ran home, showered, went to the church office all day, and headed to Arkadelphia. And then I stopped, and when I went to the bathroom, I checked, and I had streaks running up my leg, so I knew I was in trouble. So I called Dr. Ken Martin. Anybody know Dr. Martin? Yeah? And he's fixed me up a couple of times. He was one of my big sponsors for my running career. Love Ken. And he said, I'll meet you at Baptist. So went up there. And he come in there after x-ray, and he said, how did you walk in here? You broke both bones in your leg. I said, Ken, I don't know. I just do it. So yes. But there's a danger in that. You know, I could bleed to death and laugh while I'm watching myself bleed to death too. That's entirely possible. Who else had a question? Yes, sir.
Wait, can you still not feel pain?
No. Now I broke this foot before I went to Texas 3 weeks ago. Broke it behind the big toe and the next 2 toes. And the doctor said, well, I need to put you in a cast. And I said, no, I got to go to Texas and speak. I said, if I get to bleeding really bad, I'll go to the hospital. But as long as I can walk on it, I'm going to go. And so far, so good. Just the lower part of my body. I feel pain here. If you hit me in the face, I'm going to cry. But when my daddy spanked me, I couldn't tell him. It didn't hurt. I don't know if I've ever told him, so don't you dare say anything to him. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Someone wanted to ask if you got in trouble in school when you were younger.
Who put you up to that? Let me tell you a story. So I've written a book, and I didn't put it in the book, but I'm going to share it with the Awana kids because it's really cute. So I went to a rural school south of Malvern called Central Elementary. It doesn't exist anymore. But the first day of school, I'm standing out under these big pine trees, and there's pine cones. So, you know, my little creative boy in me, I'm like chunking pine cones. And as the teachers drove up, they parked under those trees. So I just thought, well, you know, here's a grenade. I'll hit the tank and hit the next tank. And guess what? You don't throw pine cones at teachers' cars. And the principal was an old Baptist deacon, Mr. Hindley. You remember Elmer? Do you ever know him? He had a paddle like this, and it was orange. It had 13 holes in the end of it, and he wrote across it, Jezebel. And I met Jezebel for the first time. I met her 3 times. I said hi to her. 3 times that day. So I've been known to get in trouble. So what you don't understand, see, you guys, y'all look at me and you think, well, gosh, that's an old guy. You got to understand, this 65-year-old body's got a 16-year-old trapped inside of it. And he do come out, okay? He do come out. Don't he, Rich? Yes, he does. I'm still a mess. I don't want to grow up. I'm a God for me kid. Right? Another question. Yes, sir.
When you met Jezebel, did it hurt?
Nope. But I never told him that. So next week, when I speak to the Wanna kids, I'll share my book, and actually I'll donate one to the church for the library. You can check it out and read it. The second edition will be out here in the next month, and it's a lot more updated. But I'm Buddy the Beagle, so I tell my story as Buddy the Beagle because I wanted to tell it to kids first. So I finished the adult version, but it takes a lot of money to publish that one, so it'll be a little while. But thank you guys for being so kind to listen and let me elaborate. Rich only hit his face about twice, so I guess I did pretty good. No more questions? Yes, sir.
How do you feel about vaccination?
Well, I'm going to leave you to your own good judgment, but I'm going to tell you this. My doctor, I was told years ago not to have vaccinations, and because my body's so susceptible. And my doctor pleaded with me about 4 years ago. He said, please get the flu shot. I said, I was told, it won't hurt you. And I was sick for a week. High fever, 103.7 was the highest it got. No more for me. No. My wife, she's a school teacher. She's got to have distemper, hepatitis, lepto, parvo. Oh, no, that's animals, isn't it? She has to have all those things. So Nancy, when she worked with you, her hepatitis, she's got to go through that whole thing all over again because they can't find her records. So she gets them all again. So I don't know. How long will I keep going? Till Jesus comes, which may not be very long. You know it? When I look at the world, you know what? In the last days, the Lord said he's going to pour his Spirit out, and I'm convinced he's doing that. And in some small way, he's chosen somehow out of the blue to open a door for an old man to tell a story about hope. That when others say, no, you can't, what do you say to them? What do you say to them? Yes, I can. So you asked me all these questions. So here's the bracelet that goes with my book about overcoming obstacles, and it says, yes, I can. That's the name of my book. So I'm going to share that. When somebody says, you can't do that, what do you tell them? Yes, I can. That's what you say. Yes, I can. Because I, or you, we can do all things through Jesus Christ who gives us strength. Amen?